The dojo was packed. Rows of folding chairs filled with parents, kids, and a few local shopkeepers who had wandered in from the strip mall just off Roosevelt Boulevard. The mats gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, fresh polish reflecting the bright colors of karate guys and flashing camera phones. The air buzzed with chatter, excitement, the scuff of sneakers against rubber. Near the back wall, half shadowed by a row of heavy bags, stood a man who once electrified boxing rings and silver screens alike. Sylvester Stallone, the Italian stallion himself. He wore an old gray hoodie, faded blue jeans, and a pair of sneakers so battered they could have come straight from a Rocky training montage. He leaned casually against the brick wall, arms folded, chin tucked slightly down, like he wanted to disappear into the crowd. He wasn't there for a show. He wasn't there to fight. He was there for family. His cousin's grandson, Frankie Russo, was about to perform his first kata in front of an audience. Sylvester had promised he'd come, quietly, no fuss, just family. But some places, some people, can't leave well enough alone. The Liberty Karate Academy wasn't a big place. Sandwiched between a Dunkin' Donuts and a shuttered video rental store, it was the kind of local dojo that lived for moments like these. Community days, where parents clapped politely, kids earned colored belts, and the instructors made sure to remind everyone who the real stars were. At the center of the mat stood Sensei Rick Maddox, the king of his little empire. Early 40s, wiry build, sleeves rolled up to reveal inked biceps, and a jawline sharpened by years of posing for promotional flyers. His GI was immaculate, his black belt double-tied and pristine, and his smile was wide enough to light up the parking lot. Rick Maddox didn't just teach karate. He sold it. To him, every demonstration was part martial art, part sales pitch, part personal branding opportunity. He loved the spotlight. And today, he spotted an even bigger one than usual. Rick's gaze locked onto Stallone, and that grin widened. He grabbed a cordless microphone, the kind usually reserved for announcing belt promotions, and his voice boomed over the cheap speakers. "Well, well, well, Philly's finest has decided to bless us with his presence today," he crowed, pacing the mat with the showmanship of a game show host. "Rocky Balboa himself, ladies and gentlemen." The crowd stirred, heads turned, phones lifted. A few teenagers in the back elbowed each other excitedly. Frankie, already fidgeting nervously with his white belt, looked like he wanted to crawl under the mats. Sylvester Stallone didn't move, didn't flinch. Rick Maddox wasn't going to let it go that easily. "Tell me, Mr. Balboa," Rick shouted, twirling the mic cord around his finger. "You here to show us some real punches? Or just signing autographs for the fans?" The parents chuckled. A few of the older kids giggled. Sly just kept leaning against the wall, arms folded, eyes unreadable. Rick kept going, energized by the growing attention. "You know, folks," he said, turning theatrically to the crowd, "movie fighting and real fighting aren't the same thing. In the movies, they choreograph it for you. Out here," he slapped the mat with a resounding thwack, "out here, it's the real deal." Some of the students clapped. Someone whistled. Rick's chest puffed a little more. He pointed straight at Stallone again. "What do you say, Rocky? Come show these kids what you got. Or are you afraid you'll pull something?" Murmurs ran through the crowd. Frankie looked close to tears. Stallone pushed off the wall with a casual motion, slow and steady. He pulled his hoodie off in one smooth move, revealing a still powerful frame under a plain black t-shirt. His arms, corded with age, and experience spoke louder than any microphone. He walked toward the mat, each step deliberate, measured. Rick chuckled into the mic. "Don't worry, folks. I'll go easy on the legend." Sylvester Stallone stopped at the edge of the mat. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and rough, carved from decades of battles, some real, some fought on celluloid. "You really want this, kid," he said, just loud enough to carry. Rick bounced lightly on the balls of his feet. "Absolutely," Sly shrugged. "Your funeral." Rick handed the mic off to an assistant and squared up. His stance was wide, flashy, more for show than for function. Sly didn't even raise his hands. He just stood there, relaxed, loose, like he was waiting for a bus. Rick struck first. He launched into a spinning back kick, high, dramatic, perfect for a YouTube thumbnail. Sly leaned back half an inch. The kick sliced through empty air. Before Rick's foot even touched down, Stallone stepped inside his guard with the smoothness of water over rocks and tapped a quick jab into Rick's ribs. It wasn't a haymaker. It wasn't a knockout shot. But it was real, and it hurt. Rick stumbled, gasping audibly. The crowd murmured. Rick straightened, laughing it off. "Lucky shot!" Sly didn't answer. Rick darted forward again, faster this time. He threw a flurry of punches, wild and aggressive. Sly slipped the first punch, caught Rick's wrist mid-swing, and twisted. Not hard enough to break anything, but enough to make Rick yelp and stagger. The parents in the front row shifted nervously. Someone lowered their phone. Rick, red-faced and breathing hard, backed away, resetting. All right, he panted. "Enough playing. Let's see what you really got." He charged. It was sloppy, desperate. Sly waited for him, timing it perfectly. As Rick closed in, Stallone planted his foot, pivoted his hips, and delivered a short, brutal left hook. Pure Philadelphia boxing at its finest. The sound cracked through the dojo like a gunshot. Rick Maddox spun almost in mid-air, then crashed flat on his back, arms sprawled, staring at the ceiling. The dojo fell completely silent. No laughter, no applause, just the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and Rick's labored breathing. Sly walked over to him, leaned down. "This ain't Hollywood, kid," he said quietly. "It's just called knowing how to fight." Then he straightened, dusted off his jeans, and walked back toward the chairs. No flex, no posing, no high fives, just Sylvester Stallone, walking away while the whole room stared after him, too stunned to even clap. Frankie's eyes shone with pride. Outside, the cold December wind rattled the doors. Inside, Liberty Karate Academy would never be quite the same. Rick Maddox lay still for several long seconds, blinking at the ceiling, the harsh overhead lights making his vision swim. Around him, the dojo shifted uncomfortably, the audience murmuring in hushed, awkward tones. Parents exchanged looks, some glancing at their children as if wondering if this was still part of the scheduled program. A few kids clutched their belts tighter, their earlier excitement turning to a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Frankie Russo, standing near the line of white belts, clutched the ends of his belt so hard his knuckles turned white. But his face was lit up with something else now, something close to pride. Rick groaned, pushing himself slowly to a seated position. His cheeks were flushed a deep crimson, sweat beading along his hairline. His ego hurt more than his jaw, though that would be sore enough come morning. Sly didn't wait for applause, didn't wait for recognition. He simply pulled his hoodie back over his head and leaned once more against the wall, hands tucked casually into his pockets. For him, it was over. But for Rick, it was just beginning. The assistant instructor, a skinny 20-something named Chris, who usually spent more time managing the dojo's TikTok account than teaching forms, rushed onto the mat. He knelt by Rick, whispering something urgently. Rick shook his head sharply, pushing him away. With a grimace, Rick got back to his feet, staggering slightly, but managing to steady himself. He turned to face the crowd, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Guess I got a little carried away," he said, trying for a light tone. A few half-hearted chuckles rippled through the crowd, but the atmosphere had changed. The sense of hero worship that had buoyed Rick's demonstrations for years had drained out of the room like air from a punctured tire. Trying to salvage the moment, Rick grabbed the mic again. "You know," he said, voice hoarse, but still carrying to the back rows, "sometimes you gotta respect the old school." His eyes flicked toward Stallone, but there was no malice now, only the raw sting of humiliation, barely masked by bravado. "Big thanks to Mr. Stallone for showing us all that experience beats Flash any day." There was a smattering of polite applause. A few parents clapped more, out of social obligation than enthusiasm. The kids, though, the ones who had cheered so loudly earlier, were now strangely quiet, their eyes darting between Rick and Sly, with new, uncertain calculations. Rick tried to segue into introducing the next batch of students for kata demonstrations, but the energy was gone. The words stumbled from his mouth, mechanical and flat. As the white belts lined up, Frankie glanced nervously over at Sly, who gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. Frankie squared his shoulders, stepped into position, and when his name was called, he moved through his kata with a sharpness and focus that hadn't been there during practice. His stances were lower, his punches crisper, and when he finished with a strong, steady bow, Sly allowed himself the faintest, proudest smile. After the demonstrations ended, the crowd began to thin, parents herding their kids toward the parking lot, some glancing over their shoulders at Stallone as they left. A few bold teenagers sneaked quick photos from a distance. Rick disappeared into his office without another word. Sly stayed where he was, waiting for Frankie to gather his gear. As Frankie approached, clutching his belt and his participation certificate, he looked up at Stallone with wide, earnest eyes. "Uncle Sly," he said in a rush, cheeks still pink from exertion. "That was the coolest thing I ever saw." Sly chuckled, low and warm, ruffling the boy's hair. "It ain't about being cool, kid," he said. "It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to let your fists do the talking." Frankie nodded solemnly, as if committing the words to memory. They were about to leave when Chris, the assistant, jogged up, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Stallone?" he stammered. Sensei Maddox wanted me to, apologize for earlier. He said he didn't mean any disrespect." Sly shrugged, non-committal. "Tell him not to worry about it. Everyone gets taught a lesson sooner or later." Chris nodded quickly, then hesitated. "Also, if it's not too much trouble, would you mind taking a picture with the kids? You know, for the dojo's Facebook page?" For a moment, Sly considered refusing. He hadn't come here to be a sideshow. But when he looked down and saw Frankie's hopeful face, he sighed and gave a small nod. "Yeah, sure. Why not?" The kids who were still lingering in the dojo practically stampeded to line up. Frankie stood proudly in front, clutching his certificate, while Sly knelt beside him, one thick arm draped casually across the boy's shoulders. Chris fumbled with the camera app on his phone. But eventually, the picture was snapped, a snapshot of a moment that none of them would soon forget. Afterward, Sly clapped Frankie lightly on the back. "You did good today, kid. Real good." Frankie beamed. "I want to punch like you someday." Sly chuckled. "First you learn to stand straight, and then you learn to punch. Remember that." They headed out into the parking lot together, the winter air sharp against their faces. The sky above Philadelphia was streaked with gray, early evening setting in. Sly paused at the edge of the lot, looking back once at the Liberty Karate Academy. Through the glass doors, he could see Rick Maddox sitting behind the front desk, shoulders slumped, head bowed, lost in thought. It wasn't triumph Sly felt, not glee, just a quiet sense of rightness. Sometimes, life handed you lessons the hard way, and sometimes, if you were lucky, you learned from them. They reached Sly's old Ford pickup, parked crookedly between two faded yellow lines. As they climbed in, Frankie chattered excitedly about the upcoming tournament season, how he wanted to train harder, maybe even get his green belt by the summer. Sly listened, nodding along, offering the occasional word of encouragement. As they pulled onto Roosevelt Boulevard, the boy grew quiet, then said, almost shyly, "Uncle Sly, were you scared when you stepped on the mat?" Sly smiled to himself, hands steady on the wheel. "Everyone's scared, Frankie. It's not about not being scared. It's about what you do when you are." Frankie nodded slowly, digesting that. The radio hummed softly in the background, some old Springsteen song about second chances drifting through the speakers. At a red light, Sly looked over at the boy, saw the spark of something new in his eyes. Confidence, maybe, or belief. It was a good thing to see. He knew he couldn't save her. No one could. But maybe he could keep fighting in her name. Maybe he could make sure no kid like Ellie ever felt invisible again. He made another decision then, quiet but final. He would start something real, something lasting. Not another charity gala, not another photo op. Something that would matter in the spaces where cameras never went. He smiled, a tired, aching smile, as he thought of the perfect name. He closed his notebook and leaned back against the creaking wooden chair, whispering to the night, "For the fighters nobody sees." In the quiet dark, with Philadelphia breathing gently beyond the rain-washed windows, Sylvester Stallone felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not the thrill of fame, not the pressure of expectation, but something simpler. Purpose. The next morning, Stallone woke early to the low hum of traffic on Walnut Street, the mist still lingering over the sidewalks. He skipped breakfast, pulled on the same worn hoodie he had worn to the hospital, and made his way back to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He knew in his gut that this visit would be different. As he walked through the automatic doors, Claire met him with red-rimmed eyes and a quiet sadness that spoke louder than words. She took his hand, squeezed it briefly, and said only, "She's resting now, but she asked for you." Stallone followed her down the hallways that had become almost familiar in their quiet resilience, passing drawings taped to the walls, superheroes, rainbows, stick figures holding hands. When he entered Ellie's room, he found her sleeping peacefully, the covers pulled up to her chin, her small hands resting atop the leather notebook. Her mother sat nearby, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her, looking up with a smile that wavered at the edges. Stallone sat down by the bed, resting his arms on his knees, and for a long time He just watched her breathe, in and out, slow and steady, like the rhythm of an old song you never quite forget. After a while, Ellie stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. She smiled faintly when she saw him, her voice barely more than a breath. "You came?" Stallone leaned closer, his voice steady even as his heart cracked. "Of course. I told you. Fighters keep their promises." She coughed weakly and gestured to the notebook. He opened it and found a new page, her handwriting shakier but still determined. "Dear Mr. Stallone, if I don't wake up again, please don't be sad. I'm not afraid. I had you as a friend. Tell the other kids they matter too. Tell them they're seen. Love, Ellie." Stallone closed his eyes, pressing the notebook gently against his forehead. When he looked up, Ellie was watching him with a peaceful kind of knowing. She raised her hand slowly, and he took it carefully in his, marveling at how someone so small could hold so much strength. "Will you remember?" she whispered. "Forever," he said. She smiled, and for a moment the room seemed to glow, like the whole world was holding its breath for her. As the monitors hummed gently, as the rain thickened outside, Ellie closed her eyes again. This time, she didn't open them. Stallone stayed beside her long after the doctors confirmed what they already knew. He didn't cry in that moment. Instead, he pressed a kiss to the top of her head, like a blessing, and whispered, "Rest easy, champ." Outside, the city moved on, unaware that somewhere the bravest fighter it never knew had laid down her gloves. In the days that followed, Stallone moved quietly. He attended Ellie's small memorial service held at a community church near the Schuylkill River. No cameras, no reporters, just family, friends, and a few nurses from the hospital. He sat in the back pew, head bowed, hands folded tightly. When Ellie's mother stood to speak, her voice strong even through the tremble, she said, "Ellie loved Rocky because he reminded her that even when you get knocked down, you can still get back up. She believed that with her whole heart. And today, she would want us to remember that strength isn't about muscles or medals. It's about hope. It's about love." Stallone felt tears sting his eyes, hot and blinding, but he let them fall silently, honoring the promise he made, to feel it all, to carry it forward. After the service, he slipped out quietly, leaving behind a small envelope at Ellie's memorial table. Inside was a single note. "You'll always be my greatest champion, Sly." Returning to Los Angeles didn't erase the weight he carried. Instead, it deepened his resolve. Stallone met with Tony and a few close friends over coffee in a small diner tucked away in West Hollywood. Over the hum of clinking mugs and the scent of bacon frying on the griddle, he laid it out simply. "I'm starting something, a foundation, not about publicity, not about movies, about real kids, the ones nobody notices, the ones who fight the hardest battles." Tony nodded without hesitation. They drafted the paperwork within days. They named it The Fighters Nobody Sees, just like Stallone had whispered to the night back in Philadelphia. No grand press conference announced it, no celebrity endorsements. Just small, quiet beginnings, anonymous hospital visits, personalized notes sent to sick children across the country, care packages that showed up without fanfare but carried hope wrapped inside them. Stallone made it a personal mission. Whenever he traveled, he asked to be taken, quietly, to a children's hospital nearby. No photos, no announcements. He would sit by bedsides, tell stories about resilience, about courage, about how real fighters were the ones who didn't wear championship belts but hospital bracelets. He carried Ellie's leather notebook everywhere he went, It grew heavier with each visit. New pages filled by trembling hands, new dreams scribbled in colored crayons, new promises whispered into the quiet spaces between beeping machines and tired prayers. Months later, during an interview for a magazine profile, a journalist noticed the notebook peeking out from Stallone's worn duffel bag. She asked about it, gently, curious. For a moment, Stallone hesitated. Then, without grandstanding, without dramatics, he said, "It's my reminder. A reminder of a girl who fought harder than anyone I ever met. She asked me to keep fighting for those who can't, and I intend to." The article came out with little fanfare, but the readers noticed. Letters poured in, not asking for autographs or photos, but thanking him, sharing their own stories of small fighters and quiet battles. And everywhere he went after that, Stallone saw it, in little gestures, small smiles, quiet nods from strangers who understood that sometimes the greatest victories are the ones nobody sees. Years later, long after blockbuster deals had come and gone, after the noise of Hollywood had dimmed into something quieter, Stallone sat in his living room, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the windows. He opened Ellie's notebook once again, flipping through the pages. He stopped at the first letter she had written him, the words still as clear, as urgent, as they had been the first night he read them. "Thank you for helping me be brave." He smiled, a small private smile, and closed the book gently. Outside, the night was deep and calm, the city breathing in soft rhythms. Stallone leaned back, resting his head against the chair, and closed his eyes. He wasn't chasing anything anymore. He wasn't running. He was exactly where he needed to be, keeping his promise, carrying forward a small girl's last wish, to fight not for applause, not for fame, but for love, for dignity, for hope. And somewhere, he liked to believe, in the quiet corners of the universe, a little girl was still smiling, her spirit as fierce and beautiful as ever, reminding him, even now, never to stop fighting for what matters most.